Exactly.
And it was great to watch it from home, like on the office.
No, I totally. In fact, the only reason I'm desperate to go to that show at 4 today is because I want to go backstage and get a sound.
Hello, good morning. Welcome to SHOWstudio. It is the last day of London Fashion Week and we're here this morning to discuss a real highlight every season of the London Fashion Week schedule, J.W. Anderson. He showed yesterday and today I have a panel of brilliant women here to discuss it with me. They're real experts in their fields. So I'm going to let each of you introduce yourselves, beginning with Navaz.
I'm Navaz, I'm an editorial consultant.
Hi, I'm Maria. I'm a brand ambassador and a brand builder.
I'm Katie Barron. I'm an author, writer, and I'm head of retail at Trends and Insights Business Stylist.
And I'm Rosanna Falconer. I'm guest chair for today. So when I was researching this panel and reading up about JW, first of all, there's so much to read because I think he gives such a great interview that he's just very quotable. I was really struck by this point of, can he do no wrong? I mean, he has 7 British Fashion Awards under his belt. In 2015, he was record-breakingly the only designer ever to have won menswear brand and women's wear brand of the year in the same year. LVMH bought a 46% stake of his company in 2013. He juggles 14 collections annually, 8 for Lave and then 6 for his own eponymous brand. And most importantly, he achieves collections that are as covetable as they push boundaries. What is his secret? It's a big question. So let's begin with you, Navaz.
I mean, he's very, very interesting. And I think, for me, in a way, I think he's very business savvy. And I think so many of our British designers came from the St. Martin's kind of like ranks, whereas he actually went to...
He's LCF, isn't he, I think?
He's LCF. Yeah. He did acting, he did LCF, he did visual merchandising with Manuela Pavesi, who is like the famous, well, to me, famous stylist who worked with Prada. So he did visual merchandising. So he always had that kind of, he came to it from a slightly different direction, which I think was very commercial. And I feel that he's always had that within him, as well as being very creative, so that balance, which a lot of, or most designers don't really have.
it's kind of being part of that image, understanding your brand as a kind of image building world in the way that even the way that he scopes out the collections, that he's one of those designers that tends to kind of say, okay, it's about a colour and it's about fit, but it's also about an image that I'm creating, hence why I don't know if he's still working with him, but the stylist Benjamin Bruno that he works with, who actually, if you look at his CV, I can't remember which agency he's with, he very much pictures himself as someone that's kind of, I'm a stylist, but actually I'm a consultant, I'm an art director, and I'm a sort of visual, you know, I'm an image maker. So it's someone that understands that world of sort of visual culture as well as fashion design, in the way that, and the place that fashion sits in visual culture and can kind of go beyond it. So I think he's quite savvy in that way. But I also think he's really interesting because I think he's one of those, he does push boundaries, and it's that kind of experimental nature of British design that we all sort of long for. We all long to see stuff on the catwalk, actually, which does feel entirely original. But now he's got the backing of LVMH, of course, the stuff's becoming way more crafted. Well, it's been like since 2013. So it's a little bit like Kim Jones for me, in the way that you've got someone that's actually quite a renegade as a thinker and can really push boundaries and mix high and low ideas and sort of this kaleidoscopic mind, but then has the craft background as well. It's like amazing ateliers who can do anything.
A powerful combination.
Yeah.
I think he also has a commercial acumen as per Navaz. He's very savvy with his decisions, and I think that makes it overall a very successful brand and a very current brand. It's the brand of the current times. His aesthetics are divine because he comes from so many versatile backgrounds. Yeah. He's colorful, but he's also quite earthy, which is a great combination to have all at once. And it's his approach, his commercial approach into everything he does that makes it so successful, I think.
I think there's a really interesting space for him now, particularly in terms of, you know, the hashtag old Celine. I feel like there's that space now, because I feel like there's no one really taking up that space, and he has a kind of similar mentality, and it's a similar kind of, you know, it's for women that want things that are a little bit complex, but still, but now even more kind of beautifully wearable. Because of course, a couple of the early collections did bomb. They commercially did bomb, but he talks about that quite a lot, which I think is really refreshing. As you said, he gives really good interviews.
He does.
And he talks about how that, you know, that he would never be able to go to a CEO now, and he would always be able to say, no, commercially, I've got this, I've totally got this, and I understand this. And I think, and that's really good. I think I actually really like the way that it shows the value of, you know, sticking with designers and these mega houses understanding needing to kind of work with people and nurture them a bit more. I think he's sort of proof of that in a way, rather than this kind of like revolving door of design talent that we've seen.
And how remarkable to have a creative director who is that on the numbers, and I mean, 14 collections a year and still managing to be that.
It takes a lot of pressure.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, when I was reading about how he manages the collections, it really made me think I need to get better at my timekeeping and time management. We're all mentioning, I think, two themes are coming out. A, this idea of pushing every season, and B, juxtaposition. I think that comes across even in the early collections that didn't do so well. The juxtaposition and the styling of them was very strong. What would you say are the codes, and maybe we'll go back to you to begin, the codes of the house that he brings back, but he's always still pushing forward? I mean, I, for example, would have thought at first it was androgyny, but I think he's moving away from that.
I don't know. I mean, I remember those very early shows. He started off with menswear, and then when he started to do... What was interesting was he started to do women's wear, and at that time when he first started, it was that kind of time of real bodycon and those massive shoes and those kind of cocktail dresses and things. And you know, I really hated that period. It's so not me. So when he came along, and it was like, okay, this menswear designer is now doing women's wear, but he was doing kind of silk bondage trousers with a mohair jumper, and it was just really cool. And then with these big boots, with massive work boots with hardware on it, but really beautiful. That really spoke to me, and I feel like he's carried on, again, that juxtaposition of maybe like quite masculine pieces in a feminine fabric, and things like the paisley, which I feel like comes back every so often. But for actually, like you said, like another code is that craftsmanship. He's a massive craft collector. Like he's a genuine collector of things like ceramics and textiles. He's really nerdy about it. So that seems to run through everything. Even you know, you might not miss it, but then when you read a press release, it will be like, oh, that's got such and such, you know, that's made in such and such a way.
It'll be like a double felted wool cape that was crafted in some sort of farm in Ireland that can only be accessed by goats or something. It's that sort of thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's probably not true, by the way, just to say that.
I think maybe for me it's, and this is, how can I describe it? For me, he's always been like feminine, masculine. Those two, they always, you know, coincide together with him. He has like a very feminine masculinity to everything he does. It's fluidity, but then there's structure.
Yeah.
Always there's fluidity and structure, and he comes in and out of it constantly. And he has found a perfect way to marry those two together and to create really excellent results, if anything. Because as a woman, you can always tell that this is a J.W. Anderson. It's not loud, but at the same time, it's very strong. It has attitude, it has structure, it has very, not bold colors, which I adore, as we all know, but it has like this amazing, wonderful, pale colors that they make you feel comfortable and cozy and warm and loving. And then there is the structure, which you feel very dynamic about it and very secure, all at the same, all at once.
It's quite powerful.
Very, very, but in a very soft way, very understated way, like powerful. Exactly.
Oh, can I? Something that I really noticed for this collection that I really like, that I think he does really cleverly, in terms of code, is there's almost a sense of kind of perversion at times, a sort of punishment. There's a sort of conflict in a lot of his work. Like, you know how you'll see things that, and again, this always reminds me of some of sort of Phoebe Philo's work, a sort of puritanical edge to some of it. Like you can see it particularly in, there's the dress that's almost got this sort of monastic top, but it's probably crafted out of some kind of beautiful kind of like pared back shearling or something, and then with a silk skirt. And the caps, quite often he'll have, I mean, this is like a literal cap, but sometimes it's more like the sort of skull caps that he had that were almost a bit Handmaid's Tale in the last collection. And I feel like there's that kind of sense, you get it a little bit in Simone Rocha as well, of that like push and pull of things that are kind of rebelling against the puritanical, but they come through in the same collection. And I really like it, and I feel it's a bit like in stylists like, you see it with people like Katie Shillingford and Katie England, that there's that kind of pushing against something that's a bit dark. And I think that's really powerful as well, because it kind of...
It's the antithesis, right?
Yeah, it's that antithesis, but there's always something. And I mean, I'm sure, you know, he's talked about in interviews that, you know, he's Northern Irish, and actually quite rare in that his parents aren't either sort of Protestant or Catholic, which is quite rare, but he's, you know, right in that kind of, you know, that melange of understanding the power of religion and the power of rituals and rules. And I think that's something that comes through in his work that I find really exciting, because I think it always gives the work a bit of an edge. And that's always a code for me with him. I mean, this collection is really interesting because it's actually really quite joyful in comparison to some of his previous collections, but you still have that feeling of some things being, you know, people kind of fastened in and buttoned up, and there's something, you know, there's always been that, it's a bit fetishy in that respect, not in the conventional sense of fetish.
How interesting
but,
you're saying this. I was trying to put it in words, but actually you nailed it. Absolutely, it's perfect, fetishes. Yeah, it does, huh? What do you think?
It's like fetish doesn't always have to be like, you know, like PVC and rubber. It's a different sort of version of it, right?
Yes, absolutely. And with his big chung, you know, like necklaces and the belts, as you very well pointed out, and the shoes, with, you know, a bit of tulle at the back.
And if every season there are if there is this edge every season, I feel like that is paired with bestsellers like the puzzle bag, record bestsellers, and then the resurgence of Leve after his work there, well, with his current work there. How does he manage to balance the two so well? What is, I'm still trying to get into the secret sauce of his.
It's acumen, at least
the pairing of the creative and commercial acumen.
Yes, absolutely, for sure. Or at least for me, this is how I look at it. Otherwise, I can't explain it, because he's like spot on. He does deliver excellent results.
I mean, I've read interviews with him where he's very much sees himself as more of a creative director than an arty designer. Like, he's not one of these designers who thinks fashion is art. He knows it needs to sell, otherwise there's no point doing it. Yeah. And therefore have as many creative ideas as you want, but you have to make them commercial. Whereas I guess other designers, they're just so ingrained to the creativity, and they have, you know, British designers do have incredible creativity, but especially now, you know, shit needs to sell. It really does need to sell. And like you say, it is, you know, a sweet spot between commercial and creativity, because there are some designers that have been going for a while now and they are extremely commercial, but I've kind of slightly lost interest in them because, you know, it's gone too much that side.
It's that funny myth, isn't it, that kind of, it's the same with photography and all other kinds of art forms. When I was commissioning photography, that kind of weird idea that actually things that people have seen before and things that are maybe kind of quite pedestrian and say as if that is synonymous with commercial. This kind of understanding that actually, you know, people have never really wanted things that are fresh and new more than they have before because of the speed of social media, because of the speed of our digital culture. So, you know, you're right, it's that commercial in terms of, you know, being able to actually wear some of the work. I think, you know, we saw it with Marc Jacobs a bit in New York as well. But that idea that actually commercial has to be creative to an extent now. So like you say, you know, there are other designers where you're like, you kind of feel like you've seen it before, and that's the beauty of this. It's a bit like drop culture, you know, people tuning in for drops of things because you know it's the brand, but you don't know quite what you're going to get. And it's that kind of, that's the buzz of this for me. I mean, I'm sort of thrilled because I'm a fan of his, but I'm sort of thrilled that it is on that brilliant cusp between commercial and creative and wearable with this collection.
I think it's also, you know, designing from your gut, but at the same time translating your gut into business. And he has nailed it. He has trained himself to be who he is by following his, you know, his passion and by doing something that it's creatively commercial, if I may say so, because it's not actually commercial, so to speak, his collections.
Yeah.
Of course not. There is so much creativity behind it. But that's why it works. I mean, the capes, the coats he did at the show this season, they were like incredible, big puff sleeves, but very tailored, very sharp, feminine, masculine, romantic, with great details. And that, you know, that positions him into like a different kind of level. High level, of course, that is first and foremost, but at the same time, a level that, you know, like a woman will want to go and buy this creation because she's not going to feel too outrageous wearing it. It's not like something super creative or crazy. It's something that you can wear it and go out during the day, during the night, in the afternoon, and make it yours.
I see. He did a brilliant in fashion interview with Lou Stoppard for SHOWstudio, and this was early in his career. And some words really stuck in my mind. He said, I would find it depressing to not see my clothes worn. But equally, at the time he had 9 staff, and he was like, I can't possibly not have commercial interest for the brand. I know that both of you, Navaz and Katie, interviewed him quite early in his career. Did you get that takeaway from the interview, or yours was probably quite focused on art, wasn't it?
Well, mine was only, I think, maybe 2-3 years ago. He did, again, another thing he did was curating quite a big exhibition at the Hepworth Wakefield, juxtaposing like fashion against art. It's called Disobedient Bodies. So it's all about like fashion on the body, but how you could extract the body from fashion, etc. So my conversation with him was all around that, and you know, I just found him fascinating because, you know, he really knew what he was talking about in terms of collecting art. He knew he was a proper geek, proper geeky collector. Brilliant. And yeah, you know, not just one of those fashion people that's like, oh, this season I'm going to collect blah 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 because it's.
Yeah, he's very, very curious about visual culture as a whole, and I think talking about going back to the question about, you know, how do you keep so many collections going and 2 different businesses going in that respect. And I think it's partly because there's synergy between his own brand and Loewe that you know, the craft thing as we've talked about, you know, Loewe, he's really pushed the craft vibe there because he can, and he's such a big believer in this sort of neo-crafts movement, this idea of kind of, you know, we're moving into a digital space where, you know, the sense of creating heirlooms again is really important, that we're, you know, if we're starting to have less things, they have to be much more special. So these kind of physical, tangible things are going to become really important. And you know, like Navaz, when I interviewed him, it was really early in his career, so it was probably like 10 years ago, but so it was probably one of the very first collections, but I definitely had that sense of someone that was interested in filmmaking and literature and all these ideas that were kind of feeding in, and he didn't see any problem with feeding all those things into his collections, as the best sort of designers do. So he was, you know, had a gazillion different reference points, if you like. So it was sort of way too early. It would be a bit of a lie to say, you could say he was going to be a superstar. But again, he was really engaging, because it felt like you were just having a kind of a conversation about fashion within wider culture, which is always one of the most interesting things, isn't it? When you don't want to just talk about literally the product. No. I mean, obviously that's a very important part of it. Beautiful product is a, you know, incredible art form in itself. But it's really exciting when someone can kind of, when you can start to see this other world behind someone's eyes coming to you.
So what a polymath he is. I have so much more I want to ask you about, but I think this is probably a good time, because I noticed we're all referencing it quite a lot, to look at the collection that showed yesterday. And I suppose a good place to start is on the set. It was in the round, it had tiered seating, and this plush carpet that models walked through in a leisurely pace. Jonathan said that he wanted it to be this idea of walking on clouds. What were your initial impressions when looking at the show? The setting, the general ambience?
To me, it's more about the clothes, not so much about the setting, the way I look at it. The clothes that they just strike me first and foremost, if I may say so. And I love the fact that you opened the show with this exquisite cape, which was the grey cape, which was, again, it's his masculinity versus his femininity, and he made like a statement, a very elegant piece, but a very current, a very modern piece, that it can be worn anywhere, everywhere, at any given time. I love the fact the way the show was styled, the really bold chunk pieces, the necklaces, and also the hair. And the hats, the shoes. Yes, the carpet did feel very cozy and very lovely, but it was more the clothes that struck me, if anything else.
Oh no, absolutely, so very impactful.
On this particular show.
Yeah,
this particular show, because there's been shows before.
In previous, there's a lot of art,
he did display art, and that was absolutely glorious.
It's interesting, if you're not at the show, you miss things like that. Like, I haven't been to JW Anderson show for years, so I didn't know that they always have like pieces of art in the set design. So that passed me by, and the carpet, I didn't really see that, because like you said, the first 3 looks that you see, can we just show the first 3 outfits? As soon as I saw those, I was like, I'm going to love this collection. I just love the fabrics look amazing. That middle piece is really unusual, but it's, you know, very wearable. The pattern cutting is, you know, exquisite. The styling, that kind of severity with the hair, but then that quirky, I think, did Stephen Jones do the hats?
I don't know. I mean, they're levitating style jockey caps, aren't they?
Yeah, they're kind of like jockey caps / fascinators, I think. Which is kind of great, because that's very him as well, isn't it? That I think he kind of becomes aware when things become kind of very severe and serious in that kind of high fashion way, that actually, to say, I can always throw a joke in. I can always, you know, and it's that thing again, like the Katie Shillingford thing, things that like, they're right because they're almost totally wrong, you know, and I think that's good. I think
that's him, isn't it?
Yeah, it feels really, I really like that about this show.
I have a great quote on the levitating hats. He said, there's something twisted about it. You want to push the hat down, but it doesn't go down. Yeah. Instead, it creates volume and elongates the look. There's an odd irony to it, which is exactly what you were saying.
I think it's like it shows how controlled he is, in a way, that you never look at one of his collections and think, I never feel like he's ticking boxes, despite the fact that it probably will tick those commercial boxes in the end. A lot of this product, I never feel like that's part of a methodology. And I think that's so important, because I think, you know, in creative processes, it's really important, any creative process, not to think you know what the end goal is at the beginning when you start it. And with him, you always get that sort of sense of a journey through it.
But he evolves constantly.
Yeah,
and he thinks outside the box, as you kind of like pointed out.
Yeah.
And I think that's the beauty behind him as well.
Yeah, he kind of senses his own boredom really easily, and the fact that we get bored quick as well, and he sort of relays that in there. It's funny, when you're not at the show, it's really difficult to say much about about it. I mean, I know that he likes things to be in the round because he likes a sense of intimacy. I've heard that before. But I think it's quite smart, actually, that the set doesn't become too much of a distraction, because there's so much to talk about and so much to look at with the shows. And also, I think, because a lot of people know how serious he is about art, I quite like the fact that if he puts things in, it's very well considered. It's not just there, because I'm not going to mention the names of the brands, but I think there are some brands, some really huge corporate brands, that love to throw art into their stores and all kinds of places, almost as like a show of status, a show of sort of intellectual affluence. And actually, with him, it feels, when you look at his stores and things, it feels like it's much more of a real preoccupation. As Navaz has said, it's a real hobby. It's really close to his heart, and that feeds into whether it's the crafting of the clothes or the thinking behind the collection. So I quite like the fact that his shows don't feel like, the set spaces don't feel like a huge distraction. They don't feel like they're kind of like Instagram playgrounds.
And tell us about his stores as a retail expert. You see them as leaders, don't you, in retail?
I think it's interesting, yeah. I mean, it's funny because I don't think it's necessarily sort of rocket science, but I think it's interesting when you see his store that's the J.W. Anderson store itself at the Ace Hotel. It's really interesting because he uses it almost for private art projects. And so it's really nice. I like the fact, you've got this huge big brand, Loewe, and then you've got his smaller brand, which he's kind of using almost as like a sort of art school project in a much more professional way than that. There's nothing really amateur about it, but bringing in people that he's collaborating with, and it kind of really permeates through it. So if he's working with a photographer, that photographer will work with him, might be doing a show, might be doing a special book. I mean, I know that Louis Venegas did a book with him. So you get that, like you said, that feeling of someone that's always evolving, always bringing their outside world in. It feels very genuine. If you buy a piece, I think you feel like you're part of a piece of his history, which is really important. For anyone that doesn't know him in the store, so yeah, it's a space where he'll sell his own brand, but also collaborations, and there'll also be pieces of art in there. So it's almost like a very personal shop. And I think that personal aspect is really important, because in a lot of luxury brands, and because of that revolving door of designers, that's really becoming quite lost. So that sense of a store as kind of an access into somebody's personal world, even though it's mediated, is really special, I think. So I think I'm just a really, really big fan in lots of ways.
And Maria, as a woman who knows her colour and loves, a true colourist, yesterday the palette was extraordinary.
It was indeed, yes.
The fuchsia fille coupé, which looks, you think it's feathers, you think it's fur, it's not, it's this ripped fabric style. That's a standout for me. What's your take on the colour and JW's colourist tendencies?
So as I said before, I like the fact, although he's bold, but he's softly bold. He's never too bright. He does choose colors in the way that they feel very natural, although they're not very natural. Like, look at his purples and look at his like
pure.
Absolutely, like, yes. And that's a really beautiful thing to have. This particular collection, red is my favorite color, but look how beautiful this red is at the show. It's a very kind, it's a very gentle red. It's not the type of red that it's very harsh and very sharp. So it can be worn by like most skin color of women, which I think that's also like very to the point. Look at it, and the way he styled it, obviously, like with this, like it is a cape, isn't it? It's not a gilet, it's a cape. Just to tone it down a little bit, although still it's very striking. Because it does, it brings warmth and light into the whole thing. His greens this season were very, very gentle, very pure, very soft, which I loved. This particular one, that's the knitwear. The knitwear, actually, I thought it was a very, very strong key, very bulky, but really, really quite on trend at the moment, if I may say so.
He's actually always done really great knitwear. Yes. I don't really know if you think of him as a knitwear person, but I remember when he would have sometimes some of his collections that would be slightly more challenging, shall we say, that you would see it on the catwalk and be like, not sure about that. Then you were going to Selfridges and see stuff on the rail, and it would be like the selling collection. You would see like amazing knitwear that was simple but with like some sort of weird subversive twist. And yeah, I've always really liked his knitwear.
What I liked very much on this particular show was the idea that he felt that he married something that it was quite old and regal, you know, like the long yellow dress as an example with the brooch, you know, with amazing tailor black pants. And it felt very, very aristocratic, but very modern, very current. And there was like this splash of color just to make it, to freshen it up just there. Look at it. Yeah, look at the yellow. How beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, that yellow in that particular look.
How beautiful.
It was kind of making me think about the sort of aristocratic thing with someone like, you know, obviously with Lee Radziwill passing away. It really made me think of her when I saw that.
Absolutely,
actually.
yes,
That kind of, you know, there's something almost a bit about the sort of slim errands about that, I thought. It's kind of, you know, incredible people in incredible places that were just sort of almost to ridiculousness.
And look at the movement of the collection from the tulle on the shoes that
Just going to say, it looks so much better in movement than it does in still
Yes.
pictures. It does look fantastic.
What are the other codes that you see coming through, Navaz?
Trends?
And yeah, no, the other motifs that so for example, I'm seeing exposed stitching, which I know Georgie of SHOWstudio in her live in-car review, she picked up on as being evident in this collection. What do you see coming?
I mean, I think he always does those kind of weird jewellery accessory pieces as a sort of like house code. I definitely recall seeing those. I remember one of the last shows of his I saw was the one that was really kind of 80s centric. I don't remember it, but it was like a
was it the autumn winter one last season? Or the
no, it was like, I don't know, like a couple of years ago maybe, or even more than that, and it was like full on styling, like really full on big jewellery and big kind of belts and like massive shoulders and stuff like that. And you know, it's just fun. Those kind of big jewellery statements. In fact, you know, the more I think about it, some of his jewellery, even for Loewe, it's just always very, I guess, sculptural. It's that sculpture thing coming through.
Sure, yes.
And I guess jewellery is kind of wearable sculpture in that way.
Also volume, a lot of volume on his sleeves, which I love, absolutely love.
Well, he, in the Vogue interview that you mentioned, brought out volume as the key way that he's pushing.
I think it shows in this collection, absolutely, it really truly does.
He's never really afraid to kind of push the limits of sort of good taste in a way, I think. You know, and I think the funny thing, because something I loved about this show, because actually, surprisingly for me, because I'm not normally a huge Burberry fan, but I really like the Burberry collection as well. And I thought it was interesting how there's almost that sort of reference to rave culture in here. So you've almost, you know, it might be over-intellectualising it to read it like this, but thinking about, you know, we're all obsessed with Brexit and what's going to happen and what does it mean to be British and how do we reclaim something that we can be proud of as Brits these days. And I think, so for me, it was interesting looking at Burberry in that respect and looking at that, you know, part of the Burberry was almost a bit only fools and horses, I thought. You know, and then part of it, you know, acknowledging how it's been reappropriated in some places. And I thought here, the same thing again. On the one hand, you've got this kind of really aristocratic kind of, you know, Buckingham Palace sort of evening wear. And then you've got like these sort of b-boy caps, leather caps. And it's that sort of, and even the really big, juicy chains, you know. I think that, thinking about what British culture in all its things, all the things that we love about it, from like high culture, low culture, what's fun, you know, what really makes us British. I felt there was a bit of that in there. That might be reading too much into it, but
no, he said in post-show interviews that this was a very British-focused collection, British-centric collection for him.
Because I love that about Burberry. I know we're not here to talk about Burberry, but I like that about the Burberry show because I like the fact that quite often with the Burberry shows, it would always be, you know, and I think, you know, Christopher Bailey's done amazing things, but quite often it would almost be about the countryside and the art in the countryside, and sometimes it's nice to kind of get into the nitty-gritty of urban culture and, you know, the slightly more sort of down and dirty types of sides of British culture. That's really exciting as well. So there's room for both, basically, but I just thought it was really interesting seeing the Burberry show quite blew me away, and then this show I totally loved as well, and there was elements of that in it for me.
So I want to draw now on this. He is a successful British brand. This is a concerning, I don't want to get too political, but this is a concerning time for emerging British talent. Sarah Moore writes a lot about it. There are huge changes in the education system. JW, in a recent interview with ES magazine, picked out something that I found really interesting. So he is 10 years established and had this flying start in the industry. And yes, the British Fashion Council were hugely supportive, but actually a lot was down to social media being in its infancy and the way that he was able to utilize that as a platform. This quote: "There was this moment where social media was great for young brands because the big brands weren't using it. Now, big brands can invest in it and, like magazines, buy market share. Yes, Instagram was smaller 5 years ago, but it was effective. Now it's too engaged. I don't think we talk enough about these things. Younger brands need more help than ever about how to navigate that." I'd love your thoughts on his, well, on that big statement. I mean, the flying start that he had, is that still possible? The landscape has changed so much.
Oh dear.
What do you think?
Yes, it's a fantastic question because we build young brands from start. And there's plethora of young talent around at the moment, but it's very, very little space to accommodate this talent. And unless it's genuine, it comes from the heart and has a bit of a has a business plan that it doesn't have to be like in place from the beginning. There is not a lot of room around, I'm afraid, or for them to secure a position or a place in the market. It has been quite challenging lately, and what it was 10 years ago, in my opinion, it cannot be achieved as fast and as quickly these days. There are so many elements that stop young designers to become very successful.
Sounds like you're being very diplomatic. It does, doesn't it?
It's not quite diplomatic. It's just that, like, I feel I work like with young designers, and I know how it is. It's a whole structure. And how do you? What is the advice to give to a young designer?
Do you know, I could put, as a positive spin on it though, I think there is also a bit, actually, Rosanna, you probably know more about this than anyone. There is sometimes a myth that, the more followers you have, the more eyeballs you have, the more that you're directly going to be selling and, advancing, because lots of people are looking at Instagram but aren't particularly engaged. People follow a brand and they just don't really ever go back to it. So the idea of having, millions and millions of followers, some social media agencies will tell you that actually sort of having around 50,000 is a sort of kind of peak engagement. That's your real core. So just as a sort of a positive, if there's any young brands out there that are kind of worrying that they can't possibly get the same kind of hit rates because they can't pay for the sponsored posts, etc., etc. It's not necessarily quite as bad as you think in terms of, in Instagram, as we all know, there's a lot of, what you see isn't exactly what you're getting from it, is my sort of message on it. So undoubtedly
and there's a lot of pay to
hard.
play now.
Yeah, so it may look depressing, but it's not necessarily as depressing as you may think.
I don't think it's depressing. I think if you, as a young brand, if you have a vision, then what needs done is just put this vision out there and be true to yourself.
Yeah.
Just, expose yourself to cosmos, to the world, to the fashion industry, to the consumer, but be true to your gut. I think this is what differentiates you, being authentic. By trying to follow trends and by trying to buy followers or engaged in that type of way, it's not gonna take you places, especially these days. This model doesn't quite work like that at all. But if you're authentic and you know what you're designing and you know what you stand for, and you might not have a very clear idea. You might design for your audience be a 25-year-old or 25 to 30. But if you kind of sum this up and you focus and you direct yourself and your ideas to a very specific type of consumer, with a lot of room, for you to be creative, then it's a win-win situation, and the followers will come, and then you will create true stories.
And there's lots of emotion. Yeah, there's lots of different ways to create content and places to put it, and the Gen Z audience, which is not necessarily the audience that's necessarily buying a lot of fashion at the moment at those kind of prices, but the type of content they want is changing a lot. I'm doing a lot of work on this at the moment, doing a piece called Dynamic Youth, and we're looking at how different that generation how differently they consume, how differently they communicate. So it's changing all the time. So it's kind of like, you know, just, stick with it. And all you can really be is yourself and be authentic with it. And, you know, and you're also getting people, great designers that are calling out bigger designers that have been ripping them off. I saw one this week. You know, Tolu Coker, who's one of the kind of rising stars, possibly, you know, I can't really get into it, but a very, very big US designer, done something really similar this season to something she'd done a couple of seasons ago. So it's also a great place to call things out and to have a point of view and an opinion. I think actually it's that, for me, that's the key thing. Like you say, being authentic and having a point of opinion, you know, a creative opinion, whatever opinion you want to have. Because there's a lot of really bland stuff on social media. There's a lot of big brands doing really, really boring fashion films, boring social media posts, and you know
what it is. I think everyone is trying to find a way around this madness, or like this, the current times, and they try. So they try between a bit of this, a bit of that, a bit of everything, really, in order for them to, I don't know, become more structure and you know, go straight into like the deeper ends of the market. And this is where confusion comes into place. Because if you're a bit between here and there and everywhere, and you try, you know, like loads of things, then I think you lose the plot, really. You lose direction.
I think as well, because we're in this kind of very like fast-moving place at the moment, especially with Instagram, social media. I think it is tough, because I agree with you. I think, you know, strategically it makes sense to be niche. Just think small to start with. Come up with like who your niche customer is, and just target them. Don't worry about everything else. Just start small, and then it will catch on and it will grow. But I guess it's easy to say that, but you know, designers feel like they don't have that time to like build things slowly. They don't have the luxury of having that time because all these things are happening and they need to make money.
They don't actually make money if they decide to jump into it, unless they have like financial support, unless they have like an amazing, you know, like mentor, like someone to tell them exactly what to do and how to do it. They have like, they're the darling of the press, which it does help. It really truly does. Or they have like someone, like a really big, not necessarily influencer, it can be of any, you know, artistic background, to push them and to, you know, to give them this like kick start and to put them on a pedestal and on this like platform, so that they can showcase their work. Otherwise, it's a bit. It is.
I think it's, you know, coming back to being authentic, it's that realization that there's a bit of a myth that things happen overnight. We live in a culture where people expect to become super famous and make it, and if you haven't made it within a year, then obviously it's because you're no good. And it's kind of, you know, it's like the David Bowie thing that I always really love, that someone said to me the other day and said, well, you know, of course he spent like 5 years almost making it, you know, being okay, and nobody really talks about that particularly. So it's that sort of understanding of actually just sort of enjoy that journey and enjoy building things and building things slowly, so actually you look back and you still feel like that was entirely you. And I feel actually J.W. Anderson, you know, whenever we talk about interviewing him, and you do get that sense, he feels like it's the same person coming through in the interviews, I think, now. I don't know if you think that as well. So yeah, sometimes they have to be a bit slower about this.
And so we've also touched on the press, so if 20 years ago it was all about the editor of a big glossy or broadsheet giving you that platform as an emerging talent, if 10 years ago social media could be harnessed to get your word out there without having to go through the filter of the press, do you think there is another way now for an emerging talent? Or do you think we're now at this plateau of everybody's using these platforms in their own way and seeing where they go?
Well, actually, like things like collaboration is quite interesting. So many brands do collaborations, and I think if you're a small brand trying to find your way, you know, maybe collaborating with another, either small brand or, you know, an artist or someone in a different field, they're bringing two audiences of like-minded potential customers together. You know, be creative. You know, there are ways to be creative with these. You know, trying to get coverage and trying to get an audience. So
yeah, it's kind of looking at who you are and what you do and what really fits naturally. Because for some brands, you see, you know, some young designers, for instance, you can see the kind of filmmaker in them. They work in a way that's very narrative, that they love the storytelling, and that really makes sense. So therefore, like, yeah, hook up with a filmmaker and you start doing that kind of thing. For other people, not so much. Some people are, you know, it's different ways of working for different people, and yeah, finding your kind of creative tribe is really, really useful.
And actually, in a way, I think with the space we're in now, I mean, it is very difficult because it is so saturated, but it's an opportunity as well because there's so much newness. There's so much experimentation you can do. So in fact, the world is your oyster. You can try things out. Whereas in a few years' time, when either this is like imploded or it's got even more, you know, saturated, you'll look back and be like, oh, why didn't we do something really crazy and radical at the time? You know, you can be quite, I think you can be quite experimental, but I think people don't realise that because they feel like they have to follow the same patterns that everyone else does. But you can be creative.
I mean, talking about collaborations, I mean, you know, of course, J.J. Anderson is the person that did the Grindr, streamed his show on Grindr. So it's that sort of thinking outside a little bit and actually thinking, maybe, you know, people at low fashion aren't purely sitting on Instagram. I mean, they're probably on Instagram quite a lot. But there are other places. There are other places where fashion can live,
you know,
which is really interesting.
It creates emotions. It creates real, true stories. Stories that they can talk not just like to fashion people. Stories that they can talk to everyone else but fashion people. So you can engage. You can become. They feel that you know, the designer is one of them, and they are one. They become him. I think that's absolutely. It's very important because then they associate themselves and they don't feel scared or afraid to try something or to go and buy into his collection because it's expensive, because you know, because they probably feel insecure to wear it because they're not fashion. But if they feel good emotionally, then they will give themselves a chance and everybody else around them will follow.
So if we go from the loudness of social media and the noise and the saturation of that space, I love this quote from Jonathan where he takes craft as almost the opposite of that, and we've been highlighting craft throughout when we're talking about the collection and his brand in general. So craft is about detail, time and precision, not worrying about loudness. So he has such respect for craft, and 3 years ago founded Love's Craft Prize, which has attracted more than 6,000 entries, and I think is actually really a lovely way to connect to the point we were just discussing on emerging talent. He is trying to support emerging talent. When it comes to craft, what do you think makes his collections so unique, particularly now that he has the backing of LVMH?
Well, he has access to divine materials, simply because of the backing he has, and that's exquisite to have as a designer. You can experiment with different techniques. He has an incredible studio with really amazing experts that they know how to stitch and they know how to tailor, and they're great pattern cutters, and that's like so valuable to have as a designer. It's the dream of every designer to be able to have like an exquisite team to help them translate their dream or their aesthetics into reality. I think that's definitely one of the main keys for
it's
him.
like, you know, that kind of modern thinking, but with every kind of craftsperson you could possibly imagine at your disposal is, you know, you kind of, I can't really see a way for anything to be more luxury, to my mind, than that. Something that's kind of really original and intelligent and fantastic, executed in the most extraordinary way, is kind of everything, I think.
Navaz?
Yeah, I mean, just the same really. Definitely like pattern cutting, the experimental kind of fabrications and things. And I always feel like when I look at these shows, I want to kind of like go up close up and what is it made of? How is it made? Something you're not going to have seen before.
Like the dress you were talking about that's tassels but looks like it's feathers.
It looks like feathers. Yeah, I imagine walking even more so, and yet that's all tassels. It's fantastic.
Because it's interesting, because I might be wrong about this, but I think Benjamin Bruno, that we mentioned earlier, he, I think, worked with Marie-Amélie Sauvé, who of course worked with Nicolas Guesquière. She was his kind of right-hand woman at Balenciaga. And I think you can see those kind of parallels of when you see things you've never really seen before. So it might be a kind of fabrication you've never seen before. It might be a silhouette. You know, the one thing about social media that I think is interesting is that it's created this space for some people where actually they lose that sense of nostalgia that can be a bit of a drag at times when people can't help themselves but re-reference old tropes. And with this, at least you get that kind of sense, as you did with Guesquier and Maria Sauvé, things you've never really seen before that you kind of that really felt new, genuinely like a new pathway forward.
Yeah, because usually when ending a discussion on a collection, I would always think and want to ask what's next. But I think the thing about JW is who knows?
Yeah.
So I suppose if it's not what's next, it is what would you ideally like to see next from Johnson's collections?
Oh God, that's the thing. It's a really good question. I would like to just carry on, see him playing with those sort of perverse contrasts slightly. I quite like the slight weirdness of it, but in terms of what, I have no idea, and I really like it to sort of stay that way, I guess.
Right. It's the antithesis I will always look out in his collections, and to the fact that it's, as I said before, masculine, feminine, how they come together and create like really exquisite results. So I will love to see him continuing with that.
Great. And Navaz?
Yeah, I mean, I just think more of the same, really. I think he's just on the right track, the right kind of like the right level of weirdness for me. You know, I like the contrast of wearability, but with a bit of madness in it. So that's why I really like this collection, because it's got both. Whereas other collections I've found in the past have been too radical. So I kind of like this kind of like, it's the right balance of.
This is a quite mature collection in a funny way, like feminine mature collection, don't you think?
Yeah.
Yes, it feels very loving.
Yeah, like sometimes I've sort of really appreciated his, you know, intellectual ingenuity, and it's great, and there's all bits that I love, but like you say, but there are bits that are almost so awkward.
Well, because I'm thinking about like, what do I want to wear? Like, my personal shopping list.
Yes, of course.
That blazer that we just saw there.
I feel
good pieces.
You saying that's made me think that actually what I love about this collection, what I want to see more of, is that kind of is the power in his work, rather than it sort of trumped the awkwardness. For me, before, sometimes the awkwardness was kind of too deep-rooted that I couldn't really see a way in, even though I appreciated it. Whereas this one kind of feels, more powerful and more coherent to me. It really gels, this collection, I think.
Great. Well, thank you all very much. And thank you, JW Anderson, and everyone for watching.
Thank you.
Thank you.